So welcome and thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. So I would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional homes of the tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. So we cannot work to fulfill our mission of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge and recognize the true history and cost of colonization. However, acknowledgement is only a first step. So we urge you to engage in accountable relationships and informed actions. So the meetings are now taking place on the first Wednesday of every month, and that will go through all the way to November. It's not clear if December will meet, so at this point you shouldn't see that inside your calendar, but that may change as we move through the fall. Again, of course, you can always encourage people to sign up for the BHI Network Policy Digest that comes out each Friday. It's kind of a way for this group to be able to stay together and be able to communicate updates to one another. And if you have any updates around those digests, please send them to me. Anything that's happening that's amazing in your world, or anything that you would like to point out that you think needs conversation, anything you would like to have, please send it my way. And then I just wanted to give an announcement. So HDC will be organizing a book event by Richard and Leah Rothstein. So they have a new book that was just released in June called Just Action. It is a follow-up to their previous book, Color of Law. Given what is in the first book and what is in the second book, there is so much room for overlap with the work we are doing here. And we're really going to want to leverage that visit to be able to have more conversation and make sure that people are, engaged in policies that can create that type of change. So that has been confirmed to be November 2nd. And in the next week or so, we'll start to see the registration process begin. So if that is something you want to get on your calendar, just pencil it in for November 2nd at this point. And then I'm going to make sure we have Kayla in the room here. There we go. And Kayla, I'm going to make you a co-host so that you are able to do your presentation if you have anything visual to present. And so Kayla Jackson is here today from King County Department of Community and Human Services. Kayla's heading on to another meeting, so they're going to be here at the beginning, give us an update on the King County Equitable Development Initiative. So this is a part, again, of reviewing our homeownership policy framework, which we all worked through last year. Today is kind of the last scenario where we have gone through every item on that framework by the end of this meeting. And then we'll begin talking about process for re-engaging that framework, making sure that it's accurate for legislative session, making sure we talk about process. So Kayla is going to give us just kind of a short presentation, and then Kayla will be having some minutes for a Q&A. But Kayla, as long as your audio is working and everything's working out for you, you are all set to go.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
1 second, just gonna figure out presentation situation. Presentation mode. Sorry, 1 second.
We can see that just fine.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla. I am an equitable development analyst at the Department of Community and Human Services at DCHS at King County. And I'll give an update today on the King County Equitable Development Initiative work. So as part of this work, we have originally we have defined equitable development. So I just wanted to share this definition with you. In broad terms, it's an approach to planning and community development that includes a range of public and private investments, policies, and programs that support and expand leadership of historically and currently underserved and underrepresented communities, includes strategies to undo, reduce, and prevent displacement, invest in community-led and community-owned development projects, and increases access to opportunity and generational and community wealth building. The overall goal of equitable development is to advance equity and self-determination for those who are most impacted by displacement, structural racism, and other systems of oppression, especially as our communities grow and change. So we've been working on the Equitable Development Initiative implementation for a little bit over a year now. The work originally started in community through community advocacy to get a motion passed through council about 2 years ago now. So an equitable development initiative would provide funding, technical assistance, and policy recommendations to support community-led and owned efforts to purchase real estate and to develop capital projects that address displacement, increase access to opportunities, and build community and generational wealth. So this idea, as I mentioned, came from community, and community was really looking for more power and resources to own community assets so that communities can stay rooted in their neighborhoods and stay connected to their neighborhoods. And they identified that in order to do this, we need public funding streams that support these organizations to be successful. So there's a lot more detail in phase 1 of the report. We have been doing this work in 2 phases with the goal of having a transmittal to council or King County Council by January of 2024 at this point. But we do have a phase 1 report that came out in January of this past year, and we're working on phase 2. We've been working with a community planning work group pretty closely over the past year to develop this implementation plan. The community planning work group includes around 15 members who are deeply connected to communities facing displacement throughout the county. And the vision for this initiative was to have this initiative really be community-led, not just once it's off the ground, but also in the design process so that communities closest to the issue are involved in developing these solutions from the beginning. So we've been meeting almost weekly at this point, or bi-weekly, with this group to create this implementation plan. I just wanted to share a little bit about what makes this equitable development initiative different from what we're already doing. So an EDI would support community-driven projects through these various strategies, through strategic acquisition and preservation, through supporting community uses that are not just housing, but might include a community center, other community uses in a project. This would support out-of-the-box projects, so particularly mixed-use projects like the White Center Hub, for example, if you're familiar with that project. And some of these out-of-the-box projects can face unique funding challenges. It would also prioritize community ownership as a key strategy for community wealth building. And it would operate through a community-led process and have community-led decision-making processes. It would also provide wraparound services and wraparound support for these projects, which include capacity building, pre-development and capital funding, and technical assistance. And the idea also would be that it would, this initiative would invest early in projects and would also require more flexible funds that we can take more risks with. So as I mentioned, we were doing this in 2 phases. So phase 1 report is out, and I can provide a link for that for more information. But that report included some background context, the definition of equitable development that I shared earlier, a framework for what a King County EDI would look like, and recommendations and next steps for the county and for what the community structure, capacity, and resources that we would need to create this initiative. So right now we're working on phase 2. So phase 2 is expected to be completed in January of next year. And we have a pretty big task here to try to identify viable funding options for the initiative. Pretty unusual to be creating an implementation plan without funding. So that's one of our big research tasks here. Also, we're working on gathering and summarizing displacement data that would help us to make decisions in the initiative and would inform evaluation. We're finalizing objectives and strategies for preventing displacement, just furthering to develop the scope and structure of the initiative, what kinds of strategies would we would have to coordinate across county agencies, and also strategies to partner with those outside the county to achieve the goals. Phase 2 also includes proposing duties and responsibilities of a permanent advisory board and developing recommendations for how to prioritize unincorporated areas. So that's all I have for summary. Happy to answer some questions if I can, and just kind of an overview of where we are right now. We're still working with the community planning work group and a group of interdepartmental leaders in the county to really answer some of these tough questions around funding and some of the other questions on this slide here. I see Cliff.
Hey, Kayla. First of all, it's good to see you, and I'm glad you're still doing work on this. It was really great working with you on getting this over the hill. So I'm glad that you are in this capacity. So congratulations. And I do mean that. Sorry, I've just not had all my coffee today. So I guess the question at top of my mind is, you say viable funding options. Are you looking at is it a matter of wanting this to be somewhat revenue, like essentially not having to put out another tax levy or something like that? Or are there some pots that are more ideal than others that are currently under consideration?
Yeah, so in phase 1, the community planning work group identified that we would need $100 million to really meet the scale of need to support these types of projects. So knowing that that's a huge number, we're just still in the middle of research of what kinds of funding tools the county might currently have, what kinds of tools, what kinds of funding could we take advantage of that the county already has access to, what kinds of funding would we need to create. And so we're still really in the research phase of that still, and trying to identify potential options, knowing that that's a pretty big number as a big goal down the line. And so trying to figure out what we can find in the meantime, and still really in the research phase of that.
All right. I have a bunch of other questions and thoughts, but I'll defer to other folks that might want to chime in. Thanks, Kayla.
Yeah, and I guess part of that too is that because a lot of funding has specific strings attached or specific purposes for it. So part of our work in the research is to identify what kinds of funding would be able to support the goals of the EDI. So Might have to be kind of flexible funding or be able to support just specific needs that an EDI has.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Kayla, I had a quick question around the advisory board that what kind of timeline you're looking at for something like that in terms of forming it?
Yeah, so that's still kind of up in the air because a lot of this really depends on what kind of funding might be available for the initiative. So if there's, depending on the scale of funding, the advisory board timeline might look different. But right now, our plan is to just work with the CPW to identify what kinds of duties and responsibilities an advisory board would have. So we don't have a timeline yet for that.
Any other questions coming up for people while we have Kayla with us for a few more minutes? Anything here on the slide you might want another sentence or two follow up on that's coming to mind for you? I'm going to ask if there isn't another question, if you could talk a little bit about the unincorporated King County communities and how that process has been, or give us an idea of kind of what that scope of conversation is.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into some of those conversations with the community planning work group yet, but so I don't actually have a lot to share, but I can share once we start getting into those conversations. Yeah, but yeah, it also is kind of related to the scope of the initiative and the funding options. So depending on the scale of what this could look like, there'll be different questions about how unincorporated areas will be prioritized. Essentially in the motion that we are responding to with this implementation plan, where council directed us to prioritize unincorporated communities. And so our task is to develop recommendations on how to do that, but we don't really have any recommendations yet to share.
And then I guess one last question would be, you have an audience of people here who are great advocates and mobilizers and people with a lot of experience and input. What role do you see, or is there a role, or, where would we direct people who might be interested in this effort? Or if you have any engagement, opportunities, anything like that?
Yeah, there aren't any opportunities at this time, but definitely keep an eye out for the transmittal for the report, because hopefully in there, there'll be some recommendations on, potentially larger structural things to consider or support. But right now I don't have other specific ways in terms of policies to support, don't have specific recommendations.
And it looks like we do have a hand up.
Hi, this is Adria. Hi, this is Adria from the Fair Housing Center of Washington. Thank you, Kayla, for the presentation. I missed the first part, so apologies for that. But in looking at this, I'm wondering, how does this play into like the consolidated plan of different municipalities, particularly like the unincorporated areas? There seems to be a lot of overlap, at least just from looking at what you've put here, between like the affirmatively furthering fair housing initiatives that a municipality would have and the goals of this initiative. And I know that HUD, they're looking at municipalities engaging in something called a fair housing equity assessment, which would be like the next iteration of an assessment of fair housing. And there are just a lot of overlapping things in terms of displacement and stability. And so I think I'm asking a question, but I'm also making a comment that maybe that's where there can be some intersection, and maybe that's where there might be some funding opportunity too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not personally very familiar with that and love to learn more and try to see. We haven't made connections between that so far, but would love to learn more and try to see what type of intersection there could be there.
All right, well, we have time for one more question. If there is anything anyone else might be thinking about that they would like clarification around. You know, right now there's a lot of organizing around this in terms of internally, there's still work in this phase that has a lot to be done. And so not a lot of answers necessarily, but so great to understand what work is being done. Is there a last question in the room right now? Kathleen?
I just dropped it in the chat. I'm noticing that King County folks in reports use the term community ownership. I would just love to understand what the working definition of community ownership is.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can see if we defined it at all in our phase 1 report. That's probably where I would check first, but it also might be a flag that maybe we do need to define that a little bit further. And that
Yeah.
could be something that we talk about with the community planning work group.
We there's a definition of community ownership in spectrums of community accountability that ultimately says when you're fully stepping into community ownership is when the community leads. But it'd be great to like tie that term to some type of framework so that there's more supporting documentation. I do find people mean different things when they say community ownership, and it would be good to like, you know, moor it to some fixed point that everybody can refer back to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for the EDI work too, so I think part of the goal too is to support a variety of types of community ownership, because I think even within the community planning work group, there's probably people have different definitions of what that means. And yeah, but it's a great point that might need to be further defined a little bit, and at least having a conversation about it too can be helpful to kind of make sure we're supporting a variety of types of community ownership.
And Cliff, looks like you'll have the last question here.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's unfortunate because it's not even a really fantastic or complex question, but I was wondering, has the work group had a briefing on BHI, like the 7-point plan and whatnot? And if not, do you think it would be helpful perhaps for their knowledge and the kind of work that they're doing if, you know, they get a briefing on what this is?
Yeah, that could be helpful. They have definitely not had a briefing on that. We've been spending so much time in the meetings. Like it feels like we already don't have a lot of time in the meetings to kind of get through some of the questions around an equitable development initiative. So we haven't gotten too much into other types of policies or supporting other, other policies outside of this King County EDI work. So, but it could definitely be something that we could at least send along to them.
Yeah, I was just thinking because I think there's a considerable amount of overlap in the thinking behind a lot of the kind of pillars of the 7-point plan and a lot of the goals of the King County EDI, particularly kind of coming to the question of like community ownership and how that feeds into property acquisition and also particularly supporting affordable housing, and how in addition to Homestead, you know, there's Habitat and several other organizations on this call that are part of BHI that, you know, are, you know, building this like working relationship over the course of working on this, and BHI being like a focal point for all of this like energy and all this work might also be informative to them. So yeah, maybe something may help. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that recommendation.
Well, Kayla, I know that you have another engagement, so we don't want to make you late for your next appointment, but thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And we look forward to hearing an update as you get closer to, sometime in the fall, probably, when you're at the point where you might be writing up your next formal published update. And then I will make sure that the links that you provided are there with our meeting notes so that people can have a chance to review those, and then reaching out to you or whomever you indicate might be the best reach out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. So we are doing well on time, and this is going to be a series of kind of small presentations and Q&A moments to make sure that we're getting all of these items in. So next we will be hearing from Jesse Simpson, the HDC Government Relations and Policy Manager. Jesse is going to give us an update around the Seattle Design Review exemption. So again, this is something that is in our homeownership policy framework, and there has been a lot of recent movement. So I leave it to Jesse.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Basically, there are two bills related to design review that are moving at council today. The hearing starts in 30 minutes. The land use committee passed both of these bills out with some minor amendments on one of them. Some amendments on one of them. And so we do expect both bills to pass at full council, but hasn't yet officially happened. The first bill, 120591, which I'll call the Office of Housing or OH Omnibus Bill, creates a permanent exemption from design review for all affordable housing and cleans up a bunch of language related to affordable housing in the land use code, including defining affordable home ownership as affordable housing in a permanent basis. So hopefully that will, one, make affordable home ownership projects exempt from design review, and should also make things a little easier for Kathleen, our friends in the home ownership development space and policy development moving forward. So that's the OH Omnibus Bill. Glad to see it move forward. Likely will be a unanimous vote, and hasn't been too controversial, which I think is really testament to the power of advocacy in getting the temporary exemptions from design review in place, and people around the city seeing the effect of that and how it's moved forward projects more quickly, and world hasn't come crashing down. The other bill, 120581, which I'll call the SDCI bill, related to design review, gets a bit wonky, but it extends the impact of that exemption from design review by allowing administrative departures on a much bigger set of design standards, development standards, than the permanent OH Omnibus Bill language allows. So you can change through this, you can change for affordable housing and for projects that are meeting their affordable housing requirements under mandatory housing affordability with on-site performance. They can seek administrative departures to basically the entirety of the land use code, except for like the big limiters like height and floor area ratio. So we've heard of some developers who have been thinking of who've been needing some departures to make a project on a site pencil out and really maximize the potential of that site. Thinking, well, maybe we actually still need to go through design review to get the exemptions from some of these, structure width, all that. And with this secondary piece of legislation, the SDCI bill, they will no longer have to do that, and the waiver can be granted administratively by the Seattle Department of construction and inspections if it results in more housing being built. No, all that's kind of wonky. Any questions here? I do think it's a big win for affordable housing in terms of the permitting, streamlining, and seeing the much needed affordable housing get developed more quickly and without the added time and costs that design review can create.
Any questions for Jesse around this? A lot of developments in just the last couple of years, but this has been a multi-year process. And again, you know, whenever we begin to shave off cost in terms of developing homes for Black Home Initiative, being able to have homes, we need to have the people ready to go into homes, but they need homes to go into. And every time that there is cost and time added to that, that just sets back our goal. So feeling that this is a real positive win for the network and moving forward. Any other questions from anyone else coming up around this?
Just note too that the SDCI bill has a term of 24 months. And so will need to be re-examined at some point, not next year, but the year thereafter. And there was a component to allow all projects to move through administrative design review. That ended up getting taken out, kind of pending the broader examination of the design review process to make it more equitable and inclusive. And there is state legislation that is going to impact the design review process and needs to be accounted for in future follow-ups. So you'll continue to hear about design review pieces of legislation, but I think the big headline is that the affordable housers are exempted from that, and that includes homeownership development. Donald?
Yeah, is there any coordinated language in the comp plan drafts as we know it now relative to this design review? Reform in general.
I don't know. Are you meaning something that would be like in the housing element referring to?
Yes.
I don't think they're, I don't know if they're at that point in terms of drafting it, and haven't seen that draft language yet.
Okay, I can look into it. I don't want to be redundant or contradictory to something going on already, but I think it would be good to have some permanency in language in the comp plan.
That sounds great, Donald. They can get it passed today, and then they can move forward with it, you know, making sure that it's going to affect the other processes.
Okay, thanks.
What? Any other questions for Jesse as we have him here? Anything else coming up around design review exemptions? All right. Well, thank you for that update, Jesse. And, you know, if anything untoward happens today that is unexpected, and this is not something that goes as planned, please let us know and we will update. But it's looking like a really strong support for this. It came out of its committee unanimously. So that's always a good sign moving forward when you're talking about a vote. All right, well, next up we have Joseph Maverick from King County Department of Community and Human Services as well. And we're going to get an update here around the Brooks Village RFP and also King County Community Preference Program. So lots of things happening at the county. Sometimes hard to keep them all straight, but you know, all important parts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bambi. I'm going to go ahead and bounce it over to Tina Ilvonen so that she can talk about the community preference program, and then I'll go into the Brooks Village updates that we have. Tina?
Thank you. Thanks, Joseph. I just have an update on the community preference program policy from our planning department. So I'm just reading what they said since they weren't available to join us today. So I wanted to let you know that King County included a community preference requirement in the affordable housing in Skyway, West Hill, and North Highline as part of the inclusionary housing program, which passed King County Council in December of 2022. The inclusionary housing program is in King County Code at 21A48. I'll put that link in the chat. Chat. There's the link to the county code, and the requirements for community preference and affirmative marketing plan are outlined in that section 21A48 .070, and community preference is defined in King County Code at 21A06219. I'll put that in the chat too. And the final update is that the Department of Local Services and the Department of Community and Human Services are coordinating to implement the program. And if anyone has questions, I will need to ask our planning team and get back to you. But I'm happy to do that.
So maybe if you have a question that's coming up around this particular aspect, that could go into the chat, and that might be a little easier for Tina to be able to kind of cut and paste and then be able to get those answers for you if there's something that you would like to know more about. And then I'd be happy to make sure that it gets to everyone.
Thank you. And now I'll pass it back to Joseph to talk about the Brooks Village RFP.
Thanks, Tina. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so I'm Joseph. I work with Tina in King County Housing Finance, but I've been working with a lot of people at the county on developing this RFP for Brooks Village. Last month, we had a community meeting on June 3rd, where we talked about the status of the RFP as it was being drafted. So I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview of some of what we talked about last month. I'm going to share a few of the slides from that presentation, but I'm going to finish up with a few of the updates on feedback that we got from that meeting and what we've incorporated since then and where we're going. This presentation is going to be a pretty short update. So if you weren't able to be a part of that community meeting last month, or if you have more questions, I'm also going to be passing on some resources at the end of this presentation, so that you can view that whole meeting in its entirety. We have a video recording. I'll pass on the slides, and I'll also pass on a way that you can get some feedback to us outside of this meeting as well. So real quick, for anyone who's not familiar with Brooks Village, it's this 14-acre property in Skyway, West Hill. It's got about 3 acres of buildable land. You can see in this irregular pentagon, kind of the tan shape in the middle here is most of the buildable land on the property, and the rest of this is wetlands. So it's currently owned by the county, but we've been looking for ways to dispose of the land so that it can be used for affordable housing development. And we've been looking for a way to do that that's really in line with Skyway community feedback and preferences. So this RFP that I'm going to talk about is really the best vehicle that we found to do that. So the title, the working title for this RFP is the Brooks Village Direct Negotiation RFP. We've been working really hard to make sure that it's going to be an open and competitive process. And the reason we're kind of calling it the Direct Negotiation RFP is that the awarded applicant is going to win the right to directly negotiate with King County to own and construct affordable housing units on the site. So that process is going to include preliminary investigations of the site to determine whether or not it even is feasible to put housing on the site. There have been some feasibility studies done, but more needs to be done to see what's really possible within that buildable area, and whether or not that's still accurate, or whether or not that's changed, and what can kind of go on there. So in terms of the people that we're looking to apply for this RFP, nonprofit developers, they could be working with a community-based organization, or a community-based organization in Skyway that's working with a nonprofit or a for-profit developer could also apply. The real thing that we're looking for here is developers or community-based organizations that have a strong history of working with the Skyway community. That's really the through line of this RFP, is that we're trying to match community goals, community preferences, and listen to the community. That was part of the community meeting that we had in June, and we've been having community meetings since at least 2021, I think even before then, trying to figure out what the best way to dispose this land to the community, in a way that supports them. So just to go back a little bit about what this RFP really is going to award, I'm going to do the presentation faux pas and just read straight off of here to you. But the awarded applicant will win the right to directly negotiate with King County for the acquisition of the Brooks Village site in order to construct affordable homeownership project. This can be expected to entail several agreements, including long-term obligations to maintain affordability levels. The awarded applicant will not receive any funding and will not be guaranteed a successful contract negotiation or ownership of the Brooks Village site. So what does that mean? To be clear, there's not any funding associated with this RFP, and the RFP process does not make any commitment for future funding. And again, importantly, there's no guarantee that being awarded this RFP will result in a successful negotiation. The point of this RFP is so that we can directly negotiate, excuse me, with the awardee, and that we can get some more site access to that awardee so that they can run their own feasibility studies, and we can figure out what's really possible. And the end goal, hopefully, is to move towards the affordable home ownership, like we talked about. As I said before, all our priorities with this RFP have to do with community feedback and community priorities. So that means that what we would hopefully be looking for eventually that would come out of this direct negotiation would be affordable home ownership, 50 to 80% AMI, townhomes, or a mix of something like that with parking, the use of community preference, and we really want this to be matching with kind of anti-displacement efforts, as well as conservation of the wetlands of those areas that are not buildable land, that could be conserved in a number of different ways. So we had some really great questions and comments from the community when we presented on this last month, related to all sorts of things like traffic impacts and impacts of Taylor Creek and things like that. And those are all part of the presentation and the video. Some of the biggest takeaways that are being incorporated is one, just affirmation that we were going down the right path with community priorities, and that those priorities, were as they have been over the last couple of years. That just needs to be affordable home ownership, and that there's a strong interest in conservation of those wetland areas. But we had some more specific feedback as well, that we'll be wanting to incorporate Skyway West Hill community members, that they should be represented in the RFP review panels that we'll be doing, and that we'll be running interviews potentially with qualified candidates as part of the RFP review process. we believe that the RFP will go out this summer. If you again miss that community meeting, or you want more details or have more feedback from that meeting, I'm going to be linking the video recording of the community meeting as well as the link to the full slide presentation. And for further questions, I'll also be linking a feedback form that we created for that meeting so that you can reach out directly to us. That feedback form is only going to be open till the 7th. So you'll have 2 days to respond directly through that feedback form that I'll give you. But we're trying to push this as fast as we can in a responsible manner, because this has been a long process working with the site, as many of you know, but we're really excited at where we're at now. So with that, I see at least one question from Adria.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Joseph. That was insightful. And I think so I have two questions. One is, like, what would be the alternative? So you're saying that through this RFP, a developer, I'm guessing, or some partnership of development, they would have exclusive rights to negotiate with King County. Like, what would be the alternative, right? If they didn't win this, if someone didn't win this RFP, what would happen, I guess? And then my other question is related to what the last presenter mentioned in terms of the design review. So like here, there's the bullet point of townhomes or a mix of townhome and stacked flat style construction. I'm wondering, like, and like design review and all that is not my wheelhouse, but if that exemption goes through of not having to do design review, how do things like this, how are they ensured to happen, right? Like, if there's a particular style of development that the community would like, and if there's no design review process, how do you get at that?
I think those design review thing was just in Seattle, wasn't it?
Was it? Okay, yeah, and this is in unincorporated King County, so.
Yeah, and this is unincorporated King County, so that wouldn't intercept.
Okay, so in the event, and maybe, question for another day, but theoretically, right, if unincorporated King County decided to adopt similar design review exemptions,
Well,
would that impact this or no?
Design review is, I believe they were talking about specifically for permitting, which is different than putting preferences or putting putting preferences on an RFP is different than getting your building permit. So you can, I think there's two different levels of design review, I think, that we're talking about here. One is like community prefers these types of units versus design review for the building permit.
Yeah. And just, I want to address your first question as well, but just to make sure, you were asking, what's the plan, what's going to happen if we do this RFP and we have no clear awardee? Was that what you're asking?
Yeah, no clear awardee, or if a developer chooses like not to apply for the RFP, I mean, does that mean they couldn't still work with unincorporated King County? Or I don't know.
No.
I don't understand, like, the alternative to exclusive right to negotiate.
Sure. What really all that means in this context is that, the county owns this land, and we want to get it to the community, either through the nonprofit developer or the community-based organization. We're wanting it to pass to the community, and we've been trying to find the most effective way to do that for a while. And this is the vehicle that we found to do that, is to let these developers reach out to us. So if we're talking about the Brooks Village parcel specifically, you know, if a developer has interest in that, this is the time for them to apply and participate with that project. But not participating in this project, you know, doesn't mean that you couldn't work with the county or the unincorporated county in any other projects. This is really just specific to this one parcel that we've been trying to get to the community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Is there a price negotiation, or are you already assuming that this is going to be a grant to the winning bidder?
That's definitely something that'll get hammered out in the negotiation, but we're looking to basically give it over just at cost. What exactly that means, I'm not sure, but yeah, something closer to a grant, you know, maybe without calling it that specifically. But yeah, we're not trying to place any burden. We're trying to give this, and that's of course making the process more complicated.
Yeah, but there's just a lot of burdens in the site itself, so
Absolutely, yeah.
you need to make some room to be able to handle those financially.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what we're looking at in this RFP, and what we're going to be looking at as part of sort of the scoring rubric is, you know, what's the financial situation that the applicant has, and you know, what their plans are for everything for that unincorporated land, and you know what they can offer on their end, and that'll all be part of the negotiation as well.
Hi all, this is Kristen Pula at King County. I just want to reiterate what Joseph is saying there. Yes, the intent is to transfer the Brooks Village site for minimal transaction costs. So what he said is accurate, and we're not looking for any return on this site. You know, we're looking for an entity that meets the priorities that the community has expressed for the site. And so if there is an entity that does that in this process, our hope is to select an entity that really meets the community defined priorities for development at the site, and then to have them negotiate directly with the county to transfer it at minimal cost.
I like the word transfer a lot better than dispose of.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
And there's a question in the chat from Karen. Where can we see the RFP for the project? It is not published yet. Joseph, do you have an update on the expected publication date for the RFP?
We're confident it'll be during the summer. But basically as soon as we can get it out.
So once it's published, we will definitely let HDC know it's published, because, you know, we want to get applicants.
Yeah.
Having been through some of these before myself, it's always difficult when you're running a competitive process. You want as much information and design and commitment as you can get, but the more burden you put on the potential applicant, let's call them, the less applicants you will get, right? So yeah, I just be really careful about putting a lot of rules around it until you find the right match, and then you can go deeper into the process, because there's some security there for that winning bidder.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great feedback, and that's something that we've thought about a lot as we've been developing. It's a fairly unique RFP, but we wanted to make sure that a lot of that really specific stuff could get hammered out in the negotiation itself, and that we were leaving this, you know, open slightly more broadly, so that we weren't, you know, excluding and like you said, making it more burdensome for the applicants.
Cliff, you have a question?
Yes, a couple. So could you flesh out what you mean by adequate parking? And when you say larger family size units, are you talking about like 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom units? And then the second question with that is what kind of wiggle room in these negotiations will there be for like mitigating costs of the transfer? Because I was thinking the same thing Peter was, whereas if there's a little bit more flexibility and if there's a little bit more give, then it would be easier for the applicant to probably like sketch up a feasible plan.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, you know, what the site's going to look like with, you know, potentially being townhomes and stuff like that, that's really the kind of stuff that's going to be hammered out during that negotiation. You know, what I've got on the slide here, again, is just a reflection of what the community wants to have beforehand. But, you know, it is possible that we go to this negotiation and it results in no affordable housing being built. It's possible that we go there and we do the feasibility and find out that it's not a good spot. It's not as good a spot as we thought it was. We're really hoping that's not going to happen. That's not what we're anticipating, but that's just to say there's a lot of steps between now and, you know, deciding what goes there. So, you know, questions about specifically what those townhomes might look like and stuff, you know, we really don't know yet.
And with that feasibility study you alluded to, when is that gonna happen?
So to be clear, you know, kind of what we're looking at ideally is that when we have an awardee who we are doing these direct negotiations with, that a part of those negotiations will be that entity, whether it's a nonprofit or developer or the community organization, that they will run feasibility studies, and that will be able to give them increased access to the site ahead of you know, potentially contracting and giving over the land. So that'll happen as part of the negotiation, those feasibility studies.
And then Cliff, just to get back to your other questions that were specific around the size of the units and the parking, I think it's probably best to follow. Joseph is going to provide us with the links to the community meeting that kind of established this prioritization. And then that way you can do the research in terms of understanding what occurred in that meeting. Sounds like we have both a video and a transcript or summary. So lots of those details probably could be found there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
just
you.
One thing on that. As Joseph said, it will depend, like whatever entity is selected, as they go through that process of completing feasibility studies, they will then say more clearly, oh, this is feasible. This is what we'd like to do. So, you know, what we have listed in the priorities is based on what we've heard from the community. And there's flexibility and openness for an agency, an organization that wins this RFP. As they do the feasibility, they say, okay, these two things in the priorities are feasible. This third one is not.
Right.
You know, so there's openness there, and it will really depend on what they find as they do the feasibility, and then they will negotiate that with the county.
Exactly. Cliff, will you remind me what your second question was? I think I was going to pass it to Kristen, whatever it was.
Oh, I think you answered. I think you answered
did
mostly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I did mention parking, but I presume that also is going to be addressed in the priorities. So
Yeah. And same thing there, Cliff. Like if, you know, as the agency does the feasibility, if they say this is what's feasible for parking, or else it's going to be this expensive, you know, there's room. That's the space in which the agency will really get into those details and tell the county, here's what we think we can do.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Any last question here? Well, thank you all so much for chiming in. It was like a 4-for-1 there. We got we got all of you. Thanks for providing information around this unique opportunity. It's very interesting to see that community process kind of translate into the actual kind of process of figuring out what to do next. You know, we all understand that oftentimes in our culture, we're thinking about efficiency, and that doesn't mean that it always serves everyone. And so it's good to see that slowdown and that community input and being able to see a feedback loop for that, with the idea of residents being on the panel for reviewing the applicants. So if it's news to you, then it feels like a fast turnaround. You got a couple of days to put in some input there through a link that I suppose we'll have Joseph put in there. You were talking about something to do by the 7th. So that would probably be your first thing to think about. And then we can certainly provide information as our follow-up so that you could go a little bit deeper in what this process has been and what people had said. But thank you to Joseph, to Kristen, to Tina, for coming in and giving us this update. Really exciting development happening. All right, so last kind of presentation here, aside from, you know, I'll do a quick update at the end here about another project, but right now we're going to hear from Kathleen Hosfeld of Homestead Community Land Trust, and talking to us today about kind of HCLT and Skyway community. And Kathleen, I think you have yourself on mute there.
Hi, sorry about that. Thanks, Bambi. Homestead has been working hard to make itself available to communities at risk of displacement to do permanently affordable homeownership projects at their direction. So we want to be serving community-led housing developments. So it's a nice synergy with all the EDI conversation, and it does sync up with the previous presentation about Brooks Village. We have we sat in space with I think Cheryl Jackson Williams totaled it up over 300 different community residents over a period of a year and a half, understanding their interests for how they wanted to work with Homestead. And we together created a strategic plan that centers affordable home ownership, prioritizing current and former Skyway residents, so that community preference piece, economic development. So any project that we do in Skyway that we're involved in, we want to make sure that jobs and economic opportunity from our projects go as much as possible to people with ties to Skyway. We wanted to also center community-driven environmental stewardship, making sure that any homes we develop are highly environmentally sustainable and climate resilient, but also that the areas around the homes are there's green space and that's stewarded by community. So just as our homes are stewarded by community, we want any environmental green spaces to be also stewarded by community. And then we wanted to also document our partnership for future replication. Many folks are looking for a playbook on how to work with established nonprofit organizations like ourselves, where the process is truly community-led. Those rule books don't exist, or roadmaps for folks to follow. So that's something that is important to us. We are queuing ourselves up to apply for the Brooks Village site. We want to, and these are the equity benefits. It would be a focus on home ownership, focusing on the 98178 zip code, just as a marker. It's one of those priority Amazon Equity Fund priority zip codes. We want to do community ownership and equitable development, and a different brand or flavor of equitable development. Traditionally, equitable development has focused on giving money directly to communities so that they can become housing developers. We believe it's also an important equitable development model to to support communities at risk of displacement working with an established developer such as ourselves, provided that we are working at their behest rather than coming in and saying, hey, we're going to do some home ownership for you. And kind of imposing our will on the community. Climate equity is an important part of what we want to be doing, both in the homes and surrounding areas. Supporting small and minority contractors to be successful in bidding for our contracts. We want to build on lessons learned from Village Gardens project, where we had a 40% BIPOC participation in our construction contracts. We learned a lot about what it means to support small mom and pop contractors that for whom affordable homeownership projects are a nice step up. But we applied for a grant that's funded through Skyway Coalition to do a contractor capacity building program. We're just in the final stages of implementing that contract with Tabor 100. So they'll be our partner in delivering the capacity building services. And then we want to be working with a BIPOC-led land conservancy to partner on green space and wetlands restoration. So we do have our sight set on being a competitor for the Brooks Village site. We have in mind a combination of home ownership and green space for urban agriculture. Our preliminary site assessments, which you can kind of see there in the diagram, are 55 homes with a mix of townhomes and stacked flats. The stacked flats are in part for accessibility, persons with disabilities and seniors. We want to do highly energy efficient, if not net zero development. We will utilize community preference. It will not be the minimum standard. We will go for as much community preference housing as we can. Also, lessons learned from Village Gardens about needing to do a lot more outreach to prepare people who would otherwise qualify for community preference so that they are ready actually to buy homes and that we have the right product type for the people who've been displaced. And we also hope to partner with a BIPOC land conservancy on wetlands restoration and green space. We have been, one of the aspects of the RFP is that we have not been allowed to be on the site or to do any site surveys or any kind of the research we would normally do for feasibility. That is one of the intentions of having this negotiating purpose, is to allow whoever is the successful bidder to get access to the site to do the normal studies that go along with that. But in advance of that, we realize that the wetlands area is a big responsibility and it won't be funded by the normal housing sources. So we have engaged Mithun as our partner to help us imagine what the expectations and requirements for the wetlands restoration would be. There's some significant stormwater infrastructure elements that we need to think through and prepare for, in addition to the ownership and ongoing long-term stewardship of the spaces will be. So we are doing everything that we can without getting site access to prepare for the RFP process and thinking through what will be the a successful application. The strengths of what we have to bring to that application process is that we have been working with a community coalition, Black-led, BIPOC-led, centering the voices of the people in the community. Now, our relationship with Skyway goes back to at least easily 2017 when we were working with Skyway Solutions. Brooks Village was desired by the community that far back, and there was a community movement to ask King County to transfer the property for homeownership back then. we're really grateful and excited to see that the process has gotten some traction in the last couple of years and that it's moving forward to some type of decision. But what you see in front of you is a plan for the housing, plus also kind of some sketched in ideas about walking trails and things. A BIPOC-led land conservancy is working right now with community land stewards in Skyway to convene the community to imagine the green space. This is a huge site. It's as indicated is 14 acres. This is not something that Skyway is going to do on its own. You know, we will have institutional partners and other parties that will collaborate and support the community. What's important, though, is that the community of Skyway, those who are at risk of displacement, that their voices are centered in what happens on this site and who benefits. And so that's what we're committed to in supporting them in this process.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Kathleen. You know, obviously a really exciting opportunity. You're getting kind of a quick sketch there of what could be a possibility. Maybe that gets other people's creative juices flowing, but, you know, again, grounding this back in the fact that it's a really exciting parcel and opportunity and a really great moment to figure out, you know, how community can imagine for themselves something that they don't have now, but could potentially have in the future.
Angela had a question, Bambi, about community preference.
Sure.
How community preference works in general is that it does not give preference on the basis of any protected class. It focuses on displacement. So have you lived in an area? Have your ancestors lived in an area? Do you have current ties to the area? Do you have a job there? Things like that. If you have already been displaced from a location or are at risk of being displaced, community preference policies based on displacement give people additional preference in consideration to purchase homes, or in the case of renting, you know, you go to the front of the line of a waiting list. In homeownership, it's a little more complicated because you could have community ties. You could be, you know, right there in terms of community preference points, if you will. But if you are not bankable and you don't qualify for a mortgage in the right amount for these homes, then unfortunately you wouldn't be able to purchase. So this is where ultimately, if homeownership is developed at Brooks Village, this is a whole BHI wide kind of initiative to support, and we got to pull in all of the pre-purchase folks and help support all the potential applicants from this area that to get bankable and get homeownership ready, so that they are so that when they get those community preference points, they will be actually able to follow through and close on the application. So I hope that answers your question, Angela.
That was a great clarification, Kathleen. And just a reminder again, why it's so important for us to be thinking back to that very detailed and thought through 7-point plan, right? There are many, many aspects to making sure that we can meet our goal by 2027. It's not just the physical homes, but it's who is in those homes and everything around that.
Can I say one more thing, Bambi?
Sure.
With regard to feasibility, I've said this in the Skyway community meeting spaces. Folks often say, well, we'll have to see if this project pencils. And to that, the response is the community needs to get behind this project and fund it, because 55 homes in the last Black sanctuary of Washington State are too important to be allowed not to happen. So we in King County, we fund homeless housing and rental housing, sometimes up to $300,000 per home. The cost to fund this project will not be $300,000 per home. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for folks to learn about how to fund and finance affordable homeownership, but also to help us tap both the private and public funds so that this is feasible and it does pencil, and we get to protect 11 acres of beautiful green space for community enjoyment and have 55 homes for BIPOC homeownership.
Absolutely. And again, back to that kind of cohesive effort theme, right? You know, everyone needs to be involved for things to be able to happen. And it will be great to be down the road celebrating some of these homes as part of the BHI goal effort. So on that, we're almost heading to the end of our time together. Gregory Davis from Rainier Beach Action Coalition is the person who often will report into us about another project that's having to do with the Equitable Development Zoning Pilot Program. So I know that's kind of 3 of the 4 letters of all the other things we've been talking about, but it is actually different because it's a pilot program and they're trying to examine what in the zoning needs to be changed or what can we do to be flexible there in order to really create that kind of equitable development we want to see. So I have an update from Gregory, and I will also put in some links in the chat here. But just so you know, just recently here at the end of June, the City Council's Land Use Committee voted to approve the phase 1 of this zoning pilot legislation. It's a great milestone to reach and an encouraging marker of the support for what they're trying to accomplish with this project. And I have a link that I can give you here for the legislation because it's available online since it was voted for. And there was also a Capitol Hill blog that wrote up kind of the committee's vote and might be a little bit more easy to digest. So I'll put those 2 in here after I stop speaking. And then second, they're very actively exploring phase 2 legislation to establish the pilot. In fact, they are going to probably have more specifics to share in about a month or so. They're hopeful that they can get a proposal moving forward in the late summer or the fall. And so the purpose would be to pilot additional development capacity and flexibility that increases the feasibility of projects with an equitable development use, affordable housing. So we are in process. We've heard back from this development and other developments through the year. We engaged in that multi-month process to figure out what policy actions are going to most effectively increase Black home ownership. This has a lot of potential. As a pilot, there's already been work. You can go in and I'll give you some links and you'll be able to refresh yourself on what exactly this exciting work is. But it sounds like we'll also be hearing an update in about a month or so. So if not in our August meeting, then maybe in our September meeting, if there are new developments on this. All right, well, it's been a holiday week. I know we only have 3 days this week, but I'm sure a lot of us are also in holiday mind a little bit. It's hard to come back on a Wednesday. But I do really want to make sure that in these meetings that we're having together, we do provide some space at all, if possible. You know, we want to make sure that you're getting the updates you need and that we're moving forward to make sure that the policy framework is reflecting the work we've done and the work that will be coming forward. As we move forward into our next meeting together in August, there are 2 things that we'll be focusing on. You know, we have comprehensive plan updates happening all over tons of jurisdictions, and there have been opportunities around the Tukwila Middle Housing and Comprehensive Plan update. In the email that I sent around the meeting, there were some links for that, but we're looking for this group to provide all its expertise and knowledge to understand what may be something that should be considered right now in that Tukwila process. We're going to kind of present to you in August what happened in a community meeting, what kind of input we received from the Tukwila community around what they were thinking about middle housing and about the future of their Tukwila, and looking for some feedback from you. The second part of that meeting is going to be talking about updating the framework. So again, we went through that multi-month process to establish that first framework, but now we need to make sure that that framework is actually going to represent what happens in the 2024 legislative session, that it's going to be something that reflects some of the completed work that's on that list, and opening for new spots for advocacy. So before doing that, we want to pause and we want to talk about the process. What worked well last time, what didn't work well, who's in the room or who isn't in the room, what kind of outcomes or expectations we might have about this combined work that we're doing. We create this framework, we advocate for this framework, just lessons learned. This has really been 1 year as a BHI network policy group. And so it's a good moment to just pause, review, think about what we'd like to do that's a different or better. And so that's what we'll be doing when we meet in August. And so I know people are vacationing. I'll try to keep these things recorded because summer is hard. But if you are able to come, that is what we'll be talking about. Other than that, I'm hoping that if anyone has news to share or gratitude or inspiration, anything, I'm just going to leave some open floor time here at the end of our meeting. So feel free, if you have something to share, to go ahead and unmute and let us all know about your update or appreciations, anything you would like to do.
Oh, this is Adria. I'll share. Thank you for a great meeting, by the way. I mean, these are always so informative, but I just feel like I need to say that. So our organization, Fair Housing Center of Washington, we're having a conference in October. I'll put a link to it in the chat, but we're really trying to do something different. I think a lot of times when you go to conferences, you just kind of listen to people tell you things and you don't have a lot of opportunity to talk to others in the room. And so we're really trying to create a space where we're leveraging all the knowledge that's in the room to come up with some really practical housing solutions, particularly for working with folks with disabilities and other protected classes. So I'll put that in the chat, but just wanted to put that on people's radar. It's October 20th and it'll be in Tacoma.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have an announcement? Cliff? Yeah.
Yep, I'm gonna ditto that. Also, thank you, Bambi, personal thank you for your work on the Tequila event. It was definitely a lot. We had a really great turnout. I thought it was fantastic, but I do definitely want to personally thank you, Bambi, for helping to take point on that and get us all organized. So apropos of that, on the 26th of July, and I'll send out the registration link when we have it, we will be doing an advocacy training by we being Habitat for Humanity in Seattle, King, and Kittitas counties, an advocacy training. We're going to bring together homeowners, volunteers, friends from the community to talk about how we can all get involved and particularly share some skills of trade or some tricks of trade when it comes to phone banking and engaging folks around advocating for affordable housing. So yeah, I'll send the link to you, Bambi, and once that's all set up later on today.
Any other announcements? Anything that people want others to know about just in this last little moment here before we see each other again in early August? All right, well, I'm going to just reiterate my announcement at the beginning, which is that I am very excited that HDC will be organizing and helping bring Richard and Leah Rothstein in to talk about Just Action, their book. And we're really looking to leverage that as an opportunity to reinforce kind of all of the things that we were talking about here. I think we'll see a lot of what we're doing in this BHI effort within that book. And it's an opportunity for us to really glom onto something concrete, to see that we are creating that change, that, you know, brilliant minds think alike, and that there are solutions out there. And Donald, do you have an announcement for us, or you're just letting me see your lovely face before we head out?
Just being present to say adios.
All right. Well, everyone have a very great rest of this very short week, and I hope a restorative weekend. I hope all of you with dogs and cats and other animals who had a really hard time last night maybe get a good night of sleep tonight, because I need one. I'm in Capitol Hill, and the fireworks went on until about 3 in the morning. So I am coasting on very little sleep. If you talk to me later this afternoon, I may not be that coherent. So try tomorrow after I try to catch some sleep. But happy holiday to everyone, and so happy to see you all. We'll see you
Good to see
again in
everyone.
August.
Hey, Donald. See you in a bit.